So we had to get home, tell the kids Daddy had a brain tumour. And I remember my son, who was then 10, looked at me with his little chin wobbling as he held back the tears. And he just said, Dad, are you going to die? I just remember saying, my boy, I'm going to fight.
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbo with Inspired. It's great to be back for another week. And this week we are inspired with James Shone. Hi, James.
Oh, good morning, Simon. Good morning.
So good to have you, buddy. So we first met about 25 years ago, I think it was, on a Scripture Union holiday camp with pre-teens, I think. 11, 13-year-olds, was it? Early 20s, talking. I think we shared a room, didn't we? And we discussed our dreams of finding a woman and that sort of stuff. And so this is 25 years on.
You know what's really funny? I had just reconnected with Olivia, who is now my wife and has been my wife for 23 years.
Uh-huh.
And I was a very lovesick person, and I think you had slightly fallen in love with someone as well. So we were probably slightly hopeless leaders. We were kind of utterly lovesick.
Yes, I actually had a crush on one of the girls who was a fellow leader, and she was having none of it. So I crashed and burned, but I hit the jackpot another 8 years later with my Lizzie. So thank you, Lord. You answered all of our prayers in your timing, so that we got the right lady to journey with. Fantastic. So that's when we first met. Now, you know, we're going to come to your whole story, but why don't we just go back a bit and describe yourself as a teenager.
As a teenager, I think two things. I think the first thing that was a bit of a challenge for me was that my prep school closed down the year I left it. And I've got one of those horrible end of August birthdays. So I arrived at my senior school and I was still a little boy. And I was a real little boy. You know, didn't do this sort of adolescent bit for a few years. And sort of it took me a while. So I started trying to almost reinvent myself. And I became a very silly, sort of always kind of in trouble, mucking around type person. And then later on, towards the end of my teens, I wasn't a man of faith. I was sort of followed the ways of the world, really. And, you know, having fun was pretty critical to me. That was my number one game in life.
So you finished school. What happened then? Did you take a year out to go to university?
I finished school and then I went off to Oxford Brookes and had 3 more years of fairly intense fun.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, work wasn't really a priority. It was interesting though. I sort of have now got children of that age, you know, starting to go off to university and stuff. And I was talking to my mum not that long ago, and she just prayed over me in you know, that I wasn't going to be involved in drugs and I wasn't going to be involved heavily with kind of inappropriate relationships with women. And that's exactly what happened. You know, I look over that 3 years and I'm pretty ashamed of all of it, really. But it was drinking, and not really much else in the way of certainly no drugs and really no women. So I kind of, you know, I think my mum sort of accepted that there was still an area of, you know, I wasn't quite ripe to drop off the tree. And that happened a year or two later.
Okay, so how did that come about then?
That came about. So when I left Oxford, I got a job in London as a chartered surveyor. And that was great. I had I sort of landed. I was in London. I had my white Cavalier. I thought I'd landed. I really, I was sort of driving around feeling like I was the kind of next kind of Gordon Gekko or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I then, after about 4 months, which is almost unheard of, was made redundant. And I was made redundant. I don't think it was because I was utterly hopeless. I think it was because a chap had left the business to go and set up a new business in Winchester, and it actually hadn't gone anywhere. And it was a bit of a kind of last in, first out type scenario. So there I was at the top of the tree thinking all was good, you know, my white Cavalier and my sort of new job in London. and I suddenly had no job. And then 2 weeks later, Olivia, who was my girlfriend, had been my girlfriend for 2 years, left me or chucked me, or whatever term you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
And those two things, I think, brought me to the bottom of the metaphorical mountain. And I had about 4 more weeks in London before Christmas. And that was sort of quite dark. And I was very, very low. You know, I was broken, really. And I remember going home for Christmas. And again, that was a really challenging time, as where I was from, up on the Wirral, lots of families up there and lots of people starting life in London, and I'd started and already sort of crashed.
Mm.
And anyway, just after Christmas, I remember my mum walking into my room, and I actually hadn't slept all night, which is a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
I was lying, and interestingly, there was a cross that was coming through the ceiling of my room as a result of a sort of gap in the curtain and a searchlight outside. Anyway, my mum came in the morning and said, I've asked for you to go and see Steve James. And Steve James was their vicar. And Steve had lots of contacts in property in London. And that's what Mum said. Walked off out of my room down the landing and really was praying that actually I wasn't going to talk about property at all, but I was going to kind of sort myself out with God. And I knew in my heart I didn't actually want to talk about property. So I went along to Steve, and Steve will now share that I was probably the kind of easiest fruit to ever drop off a tree.
Right.
I just said, how do I become a Christian?
Wow.
And I became a Christian, and things changed thereafter, really.
Beautiful. It's funny, isn't it? I mean, I was just out this weekend, 2 days ago, talking to people on the streets, and we saw 10 people decide to follow Jesus. And,
Wow.
one girl out of Wicker, and it's so exciting, and I'm talking to a trans guy, and a lovely conversation with him, with a Ghanaian who's very, very heated, animated, and antagonistic, but actually we parted as good buddies, fist bumping, and it's just some people are ready and some are not ready. It's all in God's time, isn't it? You're obviously very right.
That's right.
And that would be the culmination, I guess, of daily prayers for a couple of decades from your parents.
Yeah.
So then what? How soon did Olivia take you back?
It sort of all followed after that. The first thing that was amazing, so I was quite sort of entrenched in a sort of culture of, the Friday night, the Saturday night. It was all part of, very much the way I lived. And I then got a place in the London Marathon to run that sort of March or April, which meant the moment I got back to London, I needed to start running and training. And that gave me a beautiful way of sort of steering away from that culture that I was so entrenched in. I got a job, and I started to go to church. And at that time, I went to All Souls in Langham Place.
Mm-hmm.
And Rico took me under his wing, and we used to meet every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. in Oxford Circus McDonald's. And I remember towards the end of that year, Rico saying to me, "Do you know what, Shone? You're a teacher." And I sort of thought back to my school days, and I thought, I'm really not a teacher at all. I'm really not a teacher. I kind of, if I'm honest with you, I don't have memories of great teachers when I was a boy at school. I sort of found them all slightly kind of disconnected and slightly disinterested in me, really. And anyway, he convinced me, and one or two other people were telling me I'm a teacher. And I then stopped my job in London. This was sort of the end of November 1995. And I stepped down, and Rico was great friends with a prep school in Oxford, the headmaster of a prep school in Oxford, Summerfields. And I went off there for a term, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I was actually there for nothing. I wasn't being paid, but I was getting experience and just loved it. and was Christian, living the life. And I then, at the end of that term, this was March, and I got a job at another school, Papawick, starting in September. So I had a sort of 5-6 month window, and I went off to Cape Town and worked with the Scripture Union in Cape Town.
Didn't know that. I did that as well, actually.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I had a fabulous time, really varied as well. I was based up in the northern suburbs, the sort of, the Afrikaans bit, and was living with an Afrikaans family, actually. But my mum's a South African. A lot of her sort of family were down in the southern suburbs. And so one moment I was in Kailicha, the next moment I was at Bishop's, the next moment I was sort of having a drink in the waterfront, and the next moment I was it was very varied, and it was good, and a real time of sort of personal growth, I think, away from Olivia, determinedly away from Olivia. And yeah, so I had an amazing, and then I joined a school called Papawick, which is another prep school in the kind of Thames Valley area in Ascot.
And how did you woo Olivia eventually?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. There's two parts to that story. The first part was, I remember it was an Easter holiday, and my mum and dad had gone on holiday to Zimbabwe, and mum had come back with cerebral malaria. And she was literally fighting for her life in Wexham Park Hospital in Slough, where my sister was sort of broadly looking after her. Meanwhile, my dad, who was a bipolar sufferer, was being taken off his drugs and being sort of, kind of ordered, what drugs would best suit him, sort of thing. And he was up in the Altrincham Priory in Manchester, and I was up north looking after, watching over dad, and my sister was down south looking after mum. And it was honestly, at the end of every day, is mum still alive? Yeah. Knows dad? Yeah. And it was a really kind of challenging time. And I remember Olivia was really the only person, the only Christian really I could go to when I was up on the Wirral, and we kind of made contact again then. And that opened up the wound fully, with a sense of, I do still really love you. Anyway, that kind of started it. She was then going into her finals. She was at Oxford University, and when she was doing her finals, I think I was a bit of a crutch at times, where she was under that pressure. And I remember her driving down from Oxford to Ascot once or twice. And then it was on holiday in Cornwall, which was the week before the Moncton camp, that we kind of reacquainted. And I remember saying to her, if we're going to do this, there has to be that, there is going to be, we've got to ask the question of marriage, because I don't want to do this again if marriage isn't on the cards. I remember her swallowing a big sort of football and sort of, right. But anyway, do you know what's weird? The day we reacquainted on the cliffs in Cornwall, it was exactly a year later, was the day that we got married.
Nice symmetry there. Good. So you got married, I think, I'm moving forward to the Moncton years. You taught at Moncton for 7 years, is that right?
Yeah, I did. So we got married, and I did 2 more years at Papawick. Then I did 3 years in Kenya. Then I did 3 years as a housemaster at King's Booton. I remember seeing you there, actually, Simon.
Yeah. Spoke there a few times.
I remember seeing you, and it was when the 2005 Ashes were coming to an absolute climax.
Freddie Flintoff, come on.
Freddie Flintoff, that's right. And I remember you coming in and being with us for a day. You were speaking in chapel, and then I think you were doing a talk in the evening. And you sort of stayed roughly with us. And so we did King's Booton, and then we did Moncton.
And all was going swimmingly. You're sort of living in, flourishing in your giftings and being affirmed. Obviously, being affirmed because you then were offered the job of being the prep school headmaster. So things were going very well. Yeah,
that's right. So 2012, London Olympics was also a great year for me. I applied. I think I decided I wanted to be a prep school head, and I really didn't want to be at Moncton, actually. And I remember when it came up, I really just got a real sense from the Lord, really, and a number of people saying, "You've got to go for it. You've got to go for it." And then I remember speaking to Olivia and she said, "Yeah, no, let's go for it. Come on, let's go for it." And anyway, went for it, and I think a surprise to many, but it was a surprise to me. I got the job.
Mm-hmm.
And we were then on cloud nine. We were going to move into that nice big headmaster's house. Our 4 kids could go through the school system. And it was just a real endorsement. I think I felt sort of, gosh, here I am, I'm 39, I'm a headmaster. Boom, boom, boom. It was tick, tick, tick.
Yeah.
And then the medical. And I always say I was quite excited to go for a medical. What happens at a medical? That's kind of what sporting legends do, isn't it? Anyway, went off to my medical, and it was the school doctor, and I think he was slightly taken back by my enthusiasm. He said, "Oh, James, just calm down. It's honestly not that exciting." Finished up with an eye test and dodgy left eye. And he said, "Right, we really need to get to the bottom of this." He sent me off to an optician, which I did the following day. And they couldn't see a problem in my eye. And then they said, "I think we need to send you off to the RUH, the big hospital in Bath," where I went the following day. And that was the moment that really my life was turned totally around. It was very weird, Simon, actually. We were due as a family with our 4 children and Olivia's brother and sister and their kids. And, big squad of us. We're all going to go over to Greece on holiday on the Saturday, and it was a Friday morning. So you can imagine our home. It was armbands and nappies and everything everywhere.
Mm.
And we just said to the kids and said to a neighbour, "Can you just keep an eye? We'll be an hour or two." Well, we weren't. We were 9 hours.
Wow.
And we returned with the news that Daddy had a brain tumour. And it was a sizable brain tumour as well. It was, I remember the registrar who had been looking at my scans just came. She was Italian, not the English way. She gave me a great big hug and just sort of whispered to me, "You are a very poorly man."
Wow.
And I thought, oh my word. And I just felt normal. And I was sort of all set to go to Greece. And I remember the doctor just saying, "There's no chance you can fly to Greece. No chance at all." So we had to get home, tell the kids they couldn't go to Greece, and Daddy had a brain tumour. And I remember my son, my eldest son, who's now 19, who was then 10, looked at me with his little chin wobbling as he held back the tears. And he just said, "Dad, are you going to die?"
Mm.
And I just only heard two words, brain tumour, as well as "I'm a very poorly man." And I just remember saying, "My boy, I'm going to fight."
Mm.
And actually, I always say to people, it has been a real fight. In many ways, it still is a fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you straight into surgery the next day? What was the time frame?
No, we had 3 or 4 days where I remember we went down to my mum's house, and that we were teaching at Moncton. They were then having house parties. The Stewards Trust house parties were going on there. So we sort of got out and went down to my mum's, and it was then all about trying to work out who is the best surgeon. We need to make sure that this is a good surgeon. Anyway, we struck on this guy in Bristol, and on the Tuesday evening we went to see him, Olivia and I. And the most amazing thing, Sam, he was all set at that meeting to say I was inoperable.
Right.
He was going to say, "I can't operate on you. It's too complex, your tumour." But he met Olivia and I, in our late 30s, 4 children, in the thick of life, and he changed his opinion sitting in front of us. That to me is the most extraordinary act of God. It really is. if he hadn't have operated and I hadn't found anyone, I was gone, he said, in the next 4 months. So he gave it a go, but it was a horrible meeting. I remember him just saying, we've got a real fight on our hands. My problem was that I had lots of tumour wrapped around my brainstem, and he was almost 100% convinced I would end up paralysed. And you see, that's a black mark against his name.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was then agreed. I'd have a sort of week or so. And I remember the night before going into hospital, I was at Super Saturday of the London Olympics. That extraordinary night when we got 3 gold medals in I think it was 47 minutes.
Yes, I remember.
And watching Mo Farah, getting a gold in the 10,000, 25 laps of the track. It was just amazing. Anyway, that was a real sort of source of something for me, because I just kept on thinking of Mo when I was in hospital, of all the kind of background training he had done for his kind of moment of glory. And anyway, in I went, and I had 2 big operations. The first one, which was quite a shock, was I remember them coming in. You have to sign a bit of paper to say I'm happy, and it was 30% chance of you being paralysed at the end of this operation, 10% chance that you'll be alive, or 10% chance that you might die. And I remember thinking, wow, gosh. But I remember we had 5 or 6. My mum came up with a friend of hers, my sister, Olivia's brother and sister, Olivia. They were praying and walking around. And I think at Moncton, there were 1 or 2 other groups of prayers. And I think that first big operation was a terrific success, because that was the brainstem, and it literally, the tumour dropped off like chicken off a bone. So it was a real success. But it was the second operation that has left me with my challenge of losing my sight. So came out of the second operation, and I literally couldn't see a stitch. And I would say, because I had a tracheostomy, I couldn't speak. So Olivia had to lip read. And I'd say to her, why are you here in the middle of the night? And because I was in 100% darkness.
Wow.
And she would say, it's not, it's lunchtime. It's like, no, it's not, it's dark. And anyway, a little bit of sight returned, and I'm still just in that place with that little bit of sight. 10% vision.
What does 10% vision equate to? Can you see out of one eye blur?
So I've got, it's very interesting. I've got no peripheral vision. So if I'm walking across a sort of busy, concourse at a station or something, I've got no awareness of what's coming from my left or right. Absolutely. And I've got a very sort of, it's quite interesting. I can be sitting on a motorway and I can see a number plate in front of me. But I can't see anything else on the road, if that makes sense. So it's like a little pinprick of light. And actually, I look at it and I do thank the Lord for it, because I can actually read a text message on a phone slowly, but I can do it. I'm one of my previous passions was playing golf, and I can hit a golf ball. I've got no balance, but I can hit a golf ball. I mean, not very well. And of course, I have no idea where it's gone. So that's a bit of a hazard. It might go in the lake that I have no idea is there.
Right. Yeah. So obviously that was a deal breaker on career. How did you both react to that?
Well, I'd just love to share one amazing story. We went through that year, which we now call our annus horribilis. It was just awful. I came out of hospital, unable to walk, really unable to talk. I was just broken. I was the most smashed up I've ever been. Then I remember going to see the chair of governors at Moncton, and very nice man. And just, I then went out to Bethel, and lots of people praying for me, and that, it wasn't happening. And came back, and I said to the chair of governors, I'm sorry, I just don't think we can take on the job. I just don't think I can't see, and I'm not strong. I had 2 small strokes as well in surgery, so my balance is awful. And I remember the chair just saying, thank you, James. we will look after you. There will be something, I don't know what. Anyway, he hadn't consulted any other governors or any staff and what then happened was I then went into radiotherapy in the summer, and the radiotherapy absolutely finished me off. I was as weak as I can remember being, and I remember Olivia driving me from Bristol, where I was having my therapy, down to my mum's, where I was just going to have 3 or 4 days rest after my last session. So I'd done 6 weeks. And the head of Moncton rang me and he said, James, I wonder if you would mind if me and the deputy chair of governors come round and see you tomorrow night. And I said, I'm really sorry, I'm not there. And anyway, that phone call finished, and Olivia then popped into his office later that afternoon. And it was evident that Moncton weren't going to be able to support me.
Right.
And that was the moment I remember sitting on my mum's spare room bed, and I thought, I've got 4 kids, I've got a wife, I'm 40 years old, but I haven't got a job, I don't know where we're going to live, and I can't see. It was just like, and I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And Mum just saying to me, it's just about taking one step at a time out of this low mountain. You are at the bottom of the mountain.
Yeah.
And you know, the most amazing thing, that evening, I got 3 phone calls, totally unprovoked by me. 3 phone calls. Phone call 1 was from a man, and we've spoken about this man before, a phenomenally generous man who said he's wired in a load of money into our account, and that amount of money was what we lived off as a family for 2 years. That's how much it was. It was an enormous amount of money. The second person was Rico, and Rico said, would I like to join a mission team for the next term? And that was, I remember being in the Cranley School chapel, and that was the first place I shared my story. And at that stage, still, I was so weak. But that gave me a sense of what I might be doing in the next part of my sort of journey. And then the third was a guy called Simon Walker, and Simon took on the role of a life coach. And he used to come and see me sitting in my white chair. This was in 2013 now, and he would always ask me, James, what's your passion? Which is the most searingly powerful question, because, you know, there I was, a broken, you know, absolutely almost finished off human being, but still inside me there was a passion. And that was really where what I now do was kind of given birth to, if that makes sense.
So that was the birth of I Can and I Am. Is that?
That's right.
Did you call it that straight away?
The next session we met, because he said to me, what's your passion? I said, my passion is to see young people believing in who they are and what they can do.
Brilliant.
So of my 16 years in teaching, 9 of them I had been a housemaster working, you know, with teenage pupils. And if I'm really honest, that was always my passion. My passion was to see people believing in who they were, whether they were academically strong, sporty, artistic, musical, dramatic, or frankly get a full house if I can't do any of them. And I just believe that God doesn't put, you know, misfits and mistakes on the earth. All of us have got some form of potential and purpose.
That's right. So was it easy to set up?
Well, it was funny. I mean, at that time, I was sitting in my dressing gown, which was basically all I could put on in the morning. I was learning how to walk again. I was learning how to talk again. My little voice box hadn't been used for a while. So that was where the seed was born. And then there was the first talk with Rico, and that was in the Cranley Chapel. And I remember getting a very positive feedback after that, and that being a sort of endorsement of, right, this is the next step. This is the next part of the journey. And yeah, no, I don't think it was. It was another year or so before I did an I Can and I Am talk. And an I Can and I Am talk then is very different to what it is now. It's really evolved as a talk, but we've now got sort of other things that we're sort of bolting on. Most notably our bus. And my big sort of thing is inflating balloons of self belief.
Mm-hmm.
I see our sort of self belief and our sense of self can be encapsulated in a balloon. And when we've got air in our balloons, that's when we bounce back. That's when we're resilient. And we need to learn to put air in people's balloons and how to do it.
Hi folks, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you are, it'd be great if you shared it with as many of your mates as possible so other people get to hear about it. And listen, if you would like to support our work in Burundi, which is the hungriest country in the world, I'd love support there too. You can do that by going to greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. Now let's get back to the podcast.
And so I'm guessing, I'm just thinking back to that first talk. I can imagine it being absolutely heart thumping in your chest. You're led to the front, I'm picturing, with your stick, someone guiding you. And I can imagine either, having seen you in action, people are either going to not get it and maybe chuckle or scorn, or be totally rapt. And it was the latter, wasn't it?
I think it was, Bud. I think it was. And I remember in time as well, once or twice speaking in those big chapels where everyone's, the audience are looking at each other. Mm-hmm. And then you sort of stand up and you say that you're a blind man and you're hobbling on this little, on this little kind of stage that you might have behind the pulpit, and you see all these heads sort of turn and look at you with a sense of, whoa. So that was that kind of sense of, okay, the Lord has not healed me. I can't see, but this is maybe something that is going to help people listen to me.
And a scripture comes to mind where Paul writes, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And actually, you wouldn't will it on anyone, but your weakness has become the strength of your message, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it has.
So what does it look like now?
Well, it's evolved. I mean, in fact, my Benji, who was helping me before, he was asking me even yesterday, he said, Dad, would you like to see again? I said, yes, of course I would. My daughter, who's 11 years old, was practicing her bowling at me in our driveway. And, an 11-year-old girl does not beat you for speed, really, but every time the ball gently passed me. But it's a very different life, and it's still, frustrating. But the great thing, Bud, is that, your one's kind of deficiency always leaves me in a place where I'm dependent on the Lord. I can't do it without him. I haven't, my 2 or 3 battles are I get very tired. I remember a surgeon saying to me that really, capacity for me is 60%. I'm never on 100%. So,
right.
And that 60% wears down quite quickly. So that's one thing, not being able to see and walking into things and falling down things. I had a situation on a train not that long ago, pre-lockdown, where I sat down directly on a man's sandwich. A tinfoil bundle of sandwiches. And this man from Swansea was furious, and he shouted out for the whole carriage to hear, "Are you effing blind?" And I held out my little white stick and I said, "Yes, I am." The whole carriage thought it's like Monty Python, come again, this is fun. I'm constantly having some little dramas. I fell down I can't properly run. And I was trying to get to a train. I remember at Bristol Temple Meads, and I fell down a flight of stairs,
dear.
and wallets, glasses fall off and stick and everything everywhere. But honestly, the thing that I've found actually as I travel around as someone that can't see is that 99% of people are very kind.
Hmm.
I even find that I now even take on the London Underground, which again, these are messages for the kids. Back in the day, I would hardly have even left the front door, but now I'll take on the London Underground on my own.
Hmm.
And, I will ask people at the top, I don't need people to help me down the escalators. I just say, can you point me in the right direction? And I will follow the gang and down I go. And again, I find that I'm sure God and sort of I've had kind of almost angelic visitations where arms have pulled me from one place to another, so I get in the right zone, the right direction of travel.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's a real journey. It's a real journey, but it's the journey that I've been given.
Yeah, and well done for embracing it. If we can just come back to, you talked about blowing up people's balloons of self-belief. Can you? I love that picture. Can you give us a few examples where that happened?
Yeah, I two main ways. I speak in schools to maybe a year group at a time, or perhaps even a whole school at a time. And to be honest with you, one can't always tell, what the impact is on an individual. And I love speaking to parents and staff because I want them to kind of communicate and kind of almost talk about the well-being of a young person, kind of with using the metaphor of a balloon. The other way that we work is by mentoring, and over the time, I've had two or three really interesting, two or three. I've had a few more than that, but two or three where I sort of thought, yeah, no, I've really helped that boy and his parents. And one was this boy who came all the way down from the Isle of Skye, northern Scotland.
Mm.
And he came down, and his mum runs a very, very smart hotel on Skye. And his dad was his mum and dad are separated, but his dad, is a kind of crofter up there and sort of lives a very simple life of, putting up fences and sort of, maybe milking a cow every now and then. And that was exactly who the boy was. Yet his mum was really trying to kind of get him to do something that he didn't like doing, pouring gin and tonics in the hotel, whilst he wanted to be painting a fence post. And I think one of the really important things is that we are all made, with our unique sort of space. And I think one of the things I always say to parents, rather than sort of discussing how their physics homework or their physics assessment, talk about the things that really matter, like how are they intelligent? What is their purpose? What is their God-given purpose?
Mm.
For some it might be art and music, and it gets noticed at school. But for others, it might be, acts of kindness, making things, mending things, adventure. We're all made differently. And I think that when we're doing our thing, you think of how Simon Gilbo is made, that actually getting on and that sense of excitement, adventure, is a key part for you. And we are all made uniquely different. And I think that is something that, schools with these amazing facilities and opportunities should be using those things to say, yeah, no, I recognize who Zach Gilbo is. He's this. I recognize who Benji Shone is. Yeah, that should be his direction of travel.
Mm.
Whereas I often feel that the direction of travel in a school is just, you sum up a human being with three letters on a piece of paper, and it's like, well, we're more than that. We're not little academic robots. We're human beings with potential.
Yeah, absolutely.
And really, I think, a crucial part of what a school is offering should be, this is, I think, who your son or daughter is. And I think this is the kind of direction of travel.
Mm.
And it's not just up to a kind of ISCO report that is, it's a very kind of, great idea, but it's a rather dated concept. You sort of fill in a number of questions and they tell you what you should do. But I think it's in the extracurricular program that so much observation can be done. I think observation, listening, watching, and that brief is a crucial part of looking after young people.
Yeah. Just tell us briefly, before we draw stumps, about the bus, which is an exciting new project you've got, and what are the plans for the
Yes, the
future?
bus. It's amazing. Today's Monday, Wednesday this week. Wednesday and Thursday are our first 2 days on the bus, visiting a school not about 10 miles from here. But the bus came about as an incredible gift from the kitchen company Howdens. So I was speaking at their what they call Golden Rooster Awards event, and the CEO, I was sitting there, it was being run a bit like the One Show, and the CEO was sitting there, and he asked me a series of questions, about a bit like what we're doing now, and what had happened, and what do I do now, and what are my plans for the future. And usually, if somebody asked me that question, I'd just like to say, well, I'd just like to be alive in a few years' time. That's really my main aim. But actually, over the course of that Christmas holidays, I thought I would love to be able to visit schools for a bit longer than an hour or two. Where I go into a school, bang, an hour or two later, I'm gone. See you in 5 years, guys. I would love to be able to go in and, to park up the bus and spend some time with kids and staff and parents and be parked up in a community for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And anyway, I went to bed that night, and the CEO texted me, and he said Howdens would love to sponsor that bus or donate that bus to you as a charity. And honestly, it is now done. It's been sort of wrapped with our sort of branding. And the ground floor of the bus has all been converted into kitchen space where we can bake bread.
Mm-hmm.
And then upstairs is a sort of breakout and a sort of workspaces where we can work and run workshops. And our real plan is that, every young person will come onto the bus, will bake a loaf of French bread, learn the kind of qualities of yeast and rising and beautiful things like that, but leave the bus with a postcard of how I can inflate my balloon. And you see, the thing is, it's slightly different for us all. We all have our, for you, it might be different to me, to Lizzie, to Olivia. They're all different. And when you know how you can inflate your balloon, you can start to kind of recognize, right, it's been a really tough week. Can I do this on Saturday? Can I do this on Sunday? And then that's putting air in your balloon for the start of the following week. So that's our aim. Each child will walk off the bus with a balloon, a postcard, a little pen, and a loaf of bread. And they will have had input. So I will always speak at a school first, and then we'll say, right, can you remember what the 4 pillars of I can and I am are, of how we inflate our balloons? Then we go through those together, and then we get them to write down, thinking about what their skills and values are and qualities, how they can best inflate their balloon.
Wonderful. Now, I would love, well, I don't want you to be over-deluged with invitations to go to every school around the country, but out of this, I just want to say to folks that I have only heard superlatives from people in terms of how moving James's presentation is, how powerful his story is, how good he is at communicating and empathizing, getting alongside kids. So if you're listening and thinking, I love my kids, I love my school to benefit from it, how can folks be in touch with you, James?
Oh, that's kind. That's really kind. It's probably emailing Rebecca, who is does everything I can't do, because I can't really see if the emails come through to me. And you can contact her by sending an email to Rebecca at icanandiam.com. Rebecca at icanandiam.com. And you can look at our website, and on my website, I've got 1 or 2 things, clips. There's I've done a TED talk. You can see that on there, and you can see other things. And So that will give you a flavour, and then contact Rebecca, and I'm sure. I mean, we would love to visit. I always say, my aim is to speak to as many people about their well-being as I possibly can.
Wonderful. Well, listen, icanandiam.com. We'll stick that in the blurb. James, it's been a real treat to talk to you. God bless you so much, and Olivia and the kids. Thanks for being on the show.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks, Simon.
And I hope you've been inspired. I love coming to the end of these times week by week, and I've got a smile, I've got a feel-good glow on my face. Life is not easy, got such a range of stories. But please, if you found that encouraging, give us a 5-star review on iTunes. You can be in touch with me at simongilbert.com or any of the social media platforms. Spread the word. And next week, we've got another fantastic guest. So see you next week. And it's goodbye from me and James. See ya.
Goodbye. See you, guys.
All right. Toodaloo.